The Tar Creek Superfund Site. Now, what is a Superfund? Well, according to the EPA, a Superfund site is an informal name for the CERCLA Act. Congress established the Comprehensive Environmental Response, Compensation, and Liability Act, otherwise known as CERCLA, in 1980. The CERCLA Act was made due to increasing public awareness of toxic dumping grounds. And with the CERCLA Act, the government is able to hold responsible parties accountable for negligence in regards to toxic waste site management and disposal. If there is no party held responsible over the area, then the EPA will take up that mantle and receive funding to clear up the area until it is deemed safe. Currently, there are 1,344 Superfund sites on the National Priorities List in the United States. The Tar Creek Superfund Site includes the northeastern part of Oklahoma, the southeast section of Kansas, and the southwestern area of Missouri. 80% of the land was owned by the Quapaw after being pushed out of Arkansas and into the much smaller northeastern section of Oklahoma. Tar Creek is most famous for its mining. The mines opened around 1890, where lead and zinc were its primary products, and with both world wars needing more resources than ever for production, mining drastically increased for both materials to produce bullets. Mining was rampant and lasted until 1970. Throughout that time, over 500 million tons of waste was produced, with most of that waste being mine tailings, otherwise known as chat. Now this begs the question, what is chat? Well, as previously said, chat is another name for the granular mine tailings, which is basically the waste or byproduct from lead and zinc mining. Chat contains a high amount of lead, which through long-term exposure can lead to detrimental health effects, with lead poisoning in adults and even developmental issues and health issues in children. With much of the toxic metals being in minuscule particles, it's easy for grains to get tossed into the wind or contaminate water, causing it to be inhaled or ingested unknowingly. Chat was usable in a variety of products, but as more research was done, its use has been severely limited to only being allowed to have encapsulated in asphalt or cement to prevent particles from escaping into the air. With mining being so rampant in the Tar Creek's long history, there are many caverns that are empty in the Tar Creek area. These areas would usually be filled up with water, which were then continuously pumped out while mining was ongoing, but with mining stopped, the pumps were shut down. The abandoned caverns would then fill with water that would be contaminated by the metals in the mine, which would then contaminate the groundwater and surrounding ponds and rivers. Another issue with abandoned mines were them being void of supports, which increased the likelihood of collapse. With so many void spaces from mining, there were multiple areas of surface collapse, which was an inherent danger to the community. The threat of continuous collapse was the final straw and provided a buyout for the struggling pitcher community. The effects of mining were long-reaching, and around 35% of the Quapaw children in Pitcher, Oklahoma, tested positive for high concentrations of lead in their blood at around 10 micrograms per deciliter. This affected the developmental ability of children as well as causing stunted growth and even premature births. Chat would also cause symptoms of lead poisoning in adults, along with immune system and nervous system issues due to bombardment with chat in the wind, the soil, and the local waters. Chat contaminating the soil led to contaminated plants that had high amounts of lead, cadmium, and other heavy metals according to the EPA. This made it unsafe and even dangerous to eat regularly, which not only affected citizens but the wildlife as well. The waters were contaminated with chat, which caused the water to turn orange due to the oxidization of the metals, and the water itself was acidic. All this caused the ponds and rivers to be devoid of fish and hazardous to swim in or ingest. Now the Quapaw already had much of their land taken through federal jurisdiction, but even with their now limited land, that did not stop the government or businessmen from finding ways to take even more. After lead and zinc were found in abundance on their land, many prospective mining corporations looked to claim the remaining Quapaw land, and any Quapaw who did not sell or lease their land would then be forced to through the claim of incompetence, which was the government basically saying they were mentally unfit and therefore unable to handle jurisdiction of their land, and their land would then be handled by the BIA, or Bureau of Indian Affairs, who would almost always lease their land away. With their land being used for mining, chat was supposed to be left on their grounds for their economic benefit. This would go terribly awry as the harmful effects of chat were later discovered. The EPA put a ban on sale of chat for most of its uses and limited the sale to be used for asphalt and concrete. This severely reduced its usability and therefore sellability. This would also leave the Quapaw with contaminated soils and waters, which killed off their hunting, fishing, and agriculture. They were also stuck with all the chat piles that they could not remove from their land or sell for benefit, and this was alongside the health hazards to their children who were being poisoned by the chat piles. The remediation of Tar Creek is a long and ongoing process ever since Tar Creek was labeled a Superfund Site in 1983, one of the first Superfund sites nationally. The EPA has decided to put into place steps towards remediation called operable units, or OU. Currently, there are 5 OUs, with the most recent, OU5, being put into place in August 2021. The EPA has a Superfund cleanup process with 9 steps, those being site assessment, national priorities list, remedial investigation, records of decision, remedial design, construction completion, post-construction completion, national priorities list deletion, and redevelopment. Once all of these have been completed, then it can be off the national priorities list and deemed safe for public inhabitants. Operable Unit 1, or OU1, was focused on the prevention of contamination to the Robidoux by the Boone Aquifer, with the Robidoux being connected to the regional water supply. Around 83 wells that connected to either aquifer were closed and plugged to stop seepage and contamination from the Boone Aquifer. Currently, the Robidoux is monitored by the EPA's groundwater monitoring program to oversee the continued health of the aquifer, as this will be an ongoing project. Operable Unit 2, or OU2, focused on the residential areas that had been long contaminated by chat. After the finding of high lead levels in native children, the EPA started to sample the soils in areas with a high concentration of children, like playgrounds, schools, daycares, etc. As expected, these areas had high concentrations of lead, which were continuously exposing the children, causing long-term health effects and developmental issues. Households were sampled next, and those with high amounts of lead had their yards excavated 6 feet below and sampled further until they found a safe threshold of lead in the soil, which all the soil that was removed would then be replaced with fresh soil. This, of course, did not deal with the chat piles that would contaminate the soil again in the future, but it was a good short-term solution for children's health. Operable Unit 3, or OU3, was focused on chemical containers abandoned from mining that were found in the Tar Creek area. 120 chemical containers were identified and safely removed, which basically encompasses all of OU3. Operable Unit 4, or OU4, is ongoing still and focuses on the cleanup and removal of the hundreds of chat piles abandoned on the surface. This operable unit is expected to take around 30 years of continual development since it was started in 2009. Other remedial actions from OU4 extend past the removal of chat and include remedial efforts such as supplying water to 3 residences with unsafe wells, injecting chat in the underground mine caverns, which should help stop subsidence, and cleaning out Catholic 40, which is an area that is of high historical and cultural value to the Quapaw. Another ongoing part of OU4 is the passive treatment system that was developed and operated by the University of Oklahoma, which will be used to bioremediate the contaminated waters. Operable Unit 5, or OU5, focuses on the Lower Spring and Nelson River Basin, particularly the surveying and sampling of the water and sediment to assess their contamination and risks of use. While being quite short-lived so far, it has already found results of high levels of metals in the sediment that exceed the toxicity thresholds held in place by the EPA, though as of yet, there is not enough information to assess the long-term health risks due to water or sediment contaminations. This operable unit is still ongoing. Tar Creek has come so far. It started with around 500 million tons of waste, and in 2007, an investigation was done in the area, which found only 65.4 million tons of waste still left. And as of December 2021, the EPA lists around 30 million tons of chat remaining. though of course this doesn't account for the extensive work remaining to clean the water sources in the area or revitalize the land. Most of the waste left over is in Quapaw-owned lands, and this has prompted cooperation between the EPA and Quapaw tribe, the tribe assisting in the Superfund since 2001. According to Craig Creeman, the Quapaw Nation Environmental Director, the Quapaw have removed over 4 million tons of chat and cleaned a little over 500 acres of land. There is still so much work left to do, but hopefully over the coming decades, we can see vast improvement and eventually a return of wildlife and even people back into the area.